Good afternoon, all. I'm just start off and just get right to it. Title: It's Time to Hear the Truth. Haven't heard it in a long time, have we? We hear so many lies, so much is going on with the other things that we are told to monitor, but they become so much a part of our lives until we just can't believe what's happening. But we've reached that point where as time marches on and living becomes more and more manipulated by the minions of the present rulership of this world, I find it easy to see why most people simply live their lives and accept the information offered up to them by their media outlet and their hand, if you will. Except for maybe those of us who have found God's truth and have made a solid decision to follow it through study and chosen to obey it, most people seem to teeter, wobble, and some fall down in the effort because of all of the nonsensical information that we find here in this world. Information that has us tossed here and there. Even many believers, it seems, are becoming confused in the current climate. But this is not surprising. You see, we've been warned of this, and it was a prophetic warning. It was given by Yeshua, our Messiah himself, and we find this, and let's drop anchor here in Matthew, the 24th chapter, the 23rd verse. Matthew, the 24th chapter, the 23rd verse, where it says, "Then, if any man shall say unto you, Lo, here is the Christ, or here's the Messiah, or here, believe it not. For there shall arise," here it goes again, "false Christs and false prophets, and they shall show great signs and wonders, so as to lead astray, if possible, even the elect." So if we blink and turn or begin to believe something different or begin to read something that doesn't make sense, or someone comes to us and begins to say something that might make us feel it emotionally but don't see it in that spiritual eye, we still may be drawn away. Be careful. 25, "Behold, I have told you beforehand." Now, this warning was given before Yeshua was martyred, so it was quite a while back. So as you saw, here we go again, where we're falling back and seeing where we start on a subject in the Bible study, and it continues right into the sermon. But some may think that this warning has no bearing on what's happening right now. But as believers, we know, or we should know, to give some weight to these warnings, especially considering where they come from. If it's the words of Yeshua, you can be sure of two things. Number one, that it's true, and number two, that somewhere down the line, it will occur. It may seem like, that was 1,000 years ago. That was 1,500 years ago. He knows what is happening, and he knows what will happen, and at some point, he will make you realize that a day is as 1,000 years with him. So the time period is not all that important. It's that it happened. And that's what we have to begin to recognize. But as believers, we should know to give weight to these warnings, especially considering that source. These warnings, as I said, are our guides. And surely they are better guides than what we get from the world. Because they're not interested in guiding us, they're interested in us following them. And there is a difference. But as I've said before, many of us are more products of our environment than we'll ever admit. Than we are believers in God. So much of what we do on a daily basis is rooted more in the Word, but it's influenced heavily by the world. Yet everything in the world has been folded, twisted, spindled, mutilated, handled, and made so different than it was intended that we've reached a point where little of what is done is as it was originally intended. Let's keep the suspense going for another 30 seconds or so. You know where I'm going with this. You don't know it yet, but you do know where I'm going with this. You listen to radio, at least Christian radio, you'll hear people screaming, especially in the current stream, because we want to at least make people feel that we are believers and that we're trying to do the right thing. But you'll hear people scream of putting Christ back into Christmas. If you go back far enough, you'll find out that he was never there. That these things were taught and they were brought in by the government and the false teachers of the time, that there was never a Christ in Christmas. It was actually, as I said earlier, it was either Horus or Nimrod or some other. So when they start talking about putting Christ back into Christmas, how can you put back what was never there? Many don't see it because they're simply doing what their peers do. They're doing what the world does. They're doing what everyone does because they don't care about anything. It's not being, oh, it doesn't matter. It's that that's all they've ever known. They don't see it and may never see it in this age. It makes no sense to condemn them as if they don't know or as if they know and don't care, because it's entirely possible that they've never heard of it. It was a point of pride for many years when we did this. Oh, it's so terrible. I remember years ago we were renting from a hotel and they had a Christmas tree in there, and it was just so horrible. They had to grab the tree and take it out into the yard. And in taking it out, half of the ornaments fell off of it and some of them broke. And I went up to one deacon and says, wait a minute, why just leave it there? Put a cloth over it or something. I don't care. I said, but it broke. This stuff broke. Are we going to replace that? No. Why would I buy Christmas ornaments? Why would you break them? Leave it alone. Of course, at the time, I was in the church maybe 2 or 3 years, so what do you know? A child knows right from wrong on that level. If you break something, you replace it. You go into any store in the world, what are they going to say? You broke it, you what? You bought it. Very simple. But we took pride in attacking people for doing what we just knew that they were doing evil. They weren't doing evil. They didn't know any better. And they weren't interested in knowing any better because it's easier to just float along than to dig in and try to find something to anchor yourself to. It's just the way it is. Even now, many who did these things now are starting to seek links to Hanukkah in order to fit it in. There's no need for condemnation here either. There's no reason to seek the wrong that others do. We've got enough on our own plates. Let's deal with our own menu. It's better for us to seek the truth about God for ourselves. It's better for us to abandon our pride and seek God's truth. C.S. Lewis said something that made a lot of sense about this, and I think it applies here. What he said was this: as long as you are proud, you cannot know God. You cannot know Elohim. A proud man is always looking down on things and people. And of course, as long as you're looking down in your state of unjustified pride, you cannot see something that is above you clearly. The true spirit of Elohim, the true attitude of the God-led believer, in order to see the truth of God, wants it to be seen. We have to toss aside this pride and admit that it is not what we do that makes us religious, but what Yeshua did that makes us believers. You see, had he not died for us, all of the knowledge in the world would have done one thing for us: placed us in dark graves right next to all of those whom we have condemned as being somehow less because of what they didn't do or what they did do for some reason or another. The only way to truly understand any of this is to know that the knowledge that we have given is not going to save us unless we follow it, infuse our being with it, and completely obey it, and teach our children the same. I remember when I was a little guy, back when parents taught such things, and I remember that morning I snuck under the table in the kitchen and sat there and watched my dad thumb his finger and kind of and curse to himself and put toys together. And finally, after he was completely exhausted, completely tired from putting all together these little toys, I crawled out from under the table. "Dad, are you Santa Claus?" Boy, ain't no Santa Claus. That freed me. That freed me, at least in that sense, because I knew I used to always, this is how kids are. They used to hear those songs, "I saw mommy," you know. And I'm thinking, wow, did my mommy do that? At least now it made sense. Now it made sense. But as I got older, and you come at your parents in a little bit different way, and we've heard this story, and when you hear yourself saying it and you hear someone else tell of it, I remember I'm like, "Dad, well, if there is no Santa Claus, maybe I should start looking into this Jesus stuff too." Ooh, got quiet. What happened? Because this is what kids do. They will ask you. They want the truth. They want the truth. But the world around you is in such untruth till you continue to lie because you think it's the right thing to do. Because maybe I can keep them being good just for a little bit longer. Nah. You have to teach your children honesty. And the best way to teach it is to show it in yourself. It's painful, but it's freeing in the long run because you don't get what we've gotten. So many children that just, I'm not going down there. They talk that stuff on Saturday, but they're cheating and doing everything else everybody else is doing all week. So I don't have anything to do with that. I'm done with it. And you go in most of your churches of God, and you see a lot of old folks, but you don't see too many young folks. And you don't see their children. When you see their children, if you go out on Facebook, you see them doing some of everything. But it's not that they're so terrible, it's that they had such weak examples. It's just reality. It's the truth. It's a painful truth, but it sets us right on top of everyone else when we thought it set us apart. We thought it set us apart. But if it's done properly, it should set us apart. Not above, looking down, but set us apart. A little bit different. But then you realize why so many believe it and accept it. Last week I was listening, and it was painful to hear because nowadays you have to, once you come on the radio, people have to tell you what your pedigree is, where you came from, and you find out that this person had 2 PhDs in theology and so much other. And he got there, and after about 20 minutes into the whole discourse, he said that the Bible gave no indication of the date of Yeshua's birth. Thus, to those who believe in higher education without question, it's easy to see why the rest of the world accepts the Christmas story as told in the world. Higher education accepts it. Middle education accepts it. Street corner education accepts it and goes along with it. The world is following this path not because they love Christ so much. The rest of the year, you don't hear anything about Christ or religion or anything else. As a matter of fact, you can't even pray in school. Not if it's organized from the school. So all of a sudden now it's this, but you come to realize that it's not about Christ even now. It's about lucre. It's about money. It's a lucrative thing. It's well traveled through the world, and it has an outward veneer of veracity that many now need, as every step made now seems so unsure. Wall Street is just teetering on the brink, even though gas prices are lower than they were since, the 80s or so? It's a world where any chance to celebrate anything is welcomed because there's so much negativity going on. These prevarications have been in place for centuries, yet the world has ignored them as if, that's just how it is. We know what that's like. It's time to understand that there is a biblical way to calculate to within a week the day that Yeshua was born, because this proof, when you study it and understand it fully, lines up so perfectly with the whole plan of God, the holy days, everything. It makes sense to tell it every year, although many say, "You gonna do that again this year?" I hadn't done it in about 4 years, listening to people who were afraid. That's all it was. I can't deal with fear anymore. Done with it. Done with it. If you're afraid, go call the police. In Chicago, you might wind up back here. It makes sense to tell it every year because it's the truth. And maybe we may draw some children back. We may not lose little David and some of the others, because they'll be able to do what my daughter did.
It's no Santa Claus. What y'all lying about? Why y'all lying to these kids?
It was almost embarrassing. You would go to these Christmas or whatever things, and she would be in the pageant or whatever and telling the other kids, y'all, yes, your mom and daddy did that. Ain't no Santa Claus. Poor kids were just traumatized by Rashida. But in the long run, they get the truth. This truth is the same as the proof of the true beginnings of the year, which is also untrue. You see, the year begins in the spring when all new life blooms and awakens. There's a parallel there that is not lost on us, because if we want to live again, we must follow God's program, not man's, and certainly not the program that Satan has set out here. Because also we're warned who would change times and laws to more securely trap the world in his snare, as he surely has. Let's go to Daniel, the 7th chapter, the 25th verse. If we're going to prove something, we have to prove it, not from our heads, but from this book. Daniel, the 7th chapter, the 25th verse, where it says, he shall speak words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and shall think to change the times and the laws. And they shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. Only the crux of this prophecy is for the end time, culminating in the last 3.5 years of the tribulation, where the rubber hits the road, if you will. But the changing of times and laws goes back to Antiochus Epiphanes, which most people have never heard of, and has been in place for so long that many of us have never known any other time schedule. So we can't say, oh, they just don't know, they're stupid. No, it's not stupidity. The whole world says that this is how it is. So what do? Go upstream against the whole world? Most people don't have the physical or mental strength to do that for long. Many actually believe that days also always began at midnight. Yet the Bible makes it clear that this is not what God intended. You're going to say it, you better prove it from the Bible. So let's do that. Genesis, the 1st chapter, the 4th verse. Genesis, the 1st chapter, the 4th verse, where it says, and God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, the darkness he called night. And don't miss this. There was evening and there was morning, the first day. Even give you the sequence. Now, all days begin at evening and end at the setting of the next day's sun. This pattern was established and proven by Scripture right from the beginning. Need a little more? Let's go down to verse 8 and you'll see it again. Matter of fact, you're going to see it about 5 more times. Genesis, the 1st chapter, the 8th verse, where it says, and God called the expanse heaven, and there was evening and there was morning, the 2nd day. Roll down to verse 13. And there was evening and there was morning, the 3rd day. Go down to verse 19. And there was evening and there was morning, the 4th day. Anybody writing this down? Go down to the 23rd verse. And there was evening and there was morning, the 5th day. By now, I think we realize this is not a mistake. That this is telling you what I expect. Let's go down to verse 31. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the 6th day. Now note several things here. The days began in the evening, just as darkness falls, and the next day begins on that next evening, not at midnight. The revealing of this fact is repeated in the Bible to establish the correct pattern for all time. And the first thing man did when they became powerful governmentally was change it. Midnight was that change at the start of the day, which, depending on which historical account you read, began in either ancient Egypt or during the manipulations of the Caesars of Rome. Whichever is true, and to some degree they both are. But it goes against this time frame set by God in the stars, the moon, and the sun. If people are aware of this, they show little caring of the importance of God's time and plan. Does that mean that they're against him? In most cases nowadays, they don't even know. There's no use in attacking them. You try to teach. That's what we're trying to do here today. Does it mean that we're going to look up next week and see these pews filled? I can guarantee you no. But that doesn't mean that somewhere down the line, once things do get crazy enough, somebody, hey, wait a minute, where's that little church that said that? We don't know. Which is sad, but thankfully, God has a plan which will allow them to learn fully at some future point already assigned, if they don't take the mark in the coming tribulation. Now, these changes of the months of the calendar were similar in that they were a power grab of the Caesars. God's days all had numbers. Only the Sabbath actually had a name. I think that's was that Exodus 2nd chapter, the 2nd verse, I think, where it gives you that the only name that had a day was the Sabbath. The sacred year began in March. What Yahweh called the first of months, or Abib. Notice what he told Moses and Aaron when teaching them of the Passover and days of unleavened bread. Let's go to Exodus, the 12th chapter, the 1st verse. It takes a little bit more time when you do it this way, and it's not so exciting, and oh wow, he's telling great stories. No, he's telling the great truth. Exodus, the 12th chapter, the 1st verse, where it says, and Yahweh spoke to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, this month, Abib, shall be to you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you. Speak to all the congregation of Israel, saying, in the 10th of this month, they shall take to them each man a lamb for a father's house, a lamb for a house. And if the house is too little for the lamb, let him and his neighbor next to his house take according to the number of the souls, each one according to the eating of his mouth. In other words, only take as much as you need to feed yourselves. Not enough to sell later, like the stores do. You shall count concerning the lamb. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a male of the first year. You shall take from the sheep or from the goats, and you shall keep it until the 14th day of that same first month. And the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it in the evening, and they shall take some of the blood and strike on the 2 side posts and upon the upper doorposts of the houses in which they shall eat it. And they shall eat the flesh in that night, roasted with fire, and unleavened bread. They shall eat it with bitter herbs. That month is the first of months. That's Abib, or somehow it's amazing how all of these names, when you study it, other than that first one, were not Hebrew names, but Babylonian names. That was a hint for those who catch on. First month was Abib, or Nisan. That first month, believe it or not, even in Rome, was the first month of the year originally, until the Caesars changed it. That was March, which was named after their god Mars, who was the god of what? War. What happened in Rome in March? Anybody heard of the Ides of March? That's when they would war. They wouldn't fight. This was always stupid to me, but at the same time it made this maniacal sense. There would be no wars during the winter. They would wait until the spring, and then they would start wars. And I'm thinking, if you're that mad you can wait 3 months, why not just go negotiate? What's the point to war? Just ridiculous. But they would wait until it's warm. Oh, I don't want to fight in the cold. You're going to be dead in a few days anyway. What difference does it make? If you're going to wait that long, just go negotiate. Or do like the natives did. Just get your strongest warrior. They bring their strongest warrior, and we go into the ring and just do UFC style, Although they had no UFC back then, but they would surely, if two guys went and stood right there, they would know what to do. Just is what it is. That second month was Iyar, which would be our April, which would be their Apir, which is the openings of spring. The third month was Sivan, which would be May, which brought on their god Maya, the god of growth. The fourth month, Tammuz in the Hebrew, well, actually the Babylonian, but somehow I guess it was because of all of those years that they were in Chaldea, they didn't have any names. So they used the Babylonian names, the Chaldean names. Tammuz for the fourth month, which would be our June, which is named after the Roman goddess Juno, the goddess of marriage, for those who wonder why everyone wants a June wedding. You are getting, you get it now. The fifth month, Av, which would be July, which has 1 day more because Julius Caesar wanted a longer month. So it was named July after Julius Caesar, who changed the name. And at that point, that's when all of a sudden, March wasn't the first month anymore. All of a sudden, the first month became the god Janus, or January. The god of gates, who they say was the god who kept the gates of heaven for the Roman gods. And we still buy into this because no one looks into it. Nobody checks into it. Nobody knows what happened. Oh, we just gonna go along. Oh, if everybody goes along off the cliff, you're gonna fall into the river and hit the rocks too. Oh, yep. Exactly. Unfortunately. 6th month, Elul, which would be August. Another interesting one because this one was named after August, or Augustus Caesar, who looked up and saw Julius have his month be 31 days. So I won't mind to be 31 too. So we're going to borrow one from February, the month of purity. So we're going to remove a little purity and put it in July. So now July has 31 days, just like July. And now February is down to 28. And somebody cutely decided, well, wow, that's the shortest month, so we'll make that Black History. Oh, shut up, Ray. You get my point. You get my point. It's all been changed. It's all been played with, and we don't question it, so it continues. The 7th month, Tisri, September, Septem, which, and even if you really go back and do the historical check, you'll find out that they tell you the truth. What is Septem in Roman, in Italian? It's the number 7, which is the 7th month. Shesvan, which is the 8th Hebrew month, which is Octo. In Italian, the 8th month, Octo. The 8th month comes right out and tells you. 9, Kislev in Hebrew. Novum of November. Novum is what? 9. Tevet, the 10th month. Decem. Decem is 10. 11, Shavat, which now has all of a sudden become number 1, but back in the original setup, it was January or Janus, the god of gates. We've already gone through that. Then you get to the 12th month, which is Adar in Hebrew, or February, the month of purity. And then, of course, there was an intercalary month where every 19 years they had to add a month because they had realized that they were so far off that they had to change it. But you see my point. As we see here, the world does not keep time as God has assigned it. Most of the changes were not helpful. As a matter of fact, a lot of the changes threw things off further. That's why you hear so many people continue to say that, oh, we can't know when the Sabbath was. They didn't change the actual physical day. They just changed the template from which it went. No matter how many times they changed it, the first day was still the seventh. The first day, the seventh, was still the seventh. Even when they changed it around, the first day fell right back to Sunday. The seventh day was still. So when you hear people argue that, oh, they changed the days, so they had to change the order, that's just like saying we're going to make this building something different, but we're going to change. But the only way we can change it is to tear it down and move it somewhere else. If you can call the building whatever you want to, but if you don't change it, it's still located where? 5655, or the first day. Nothing changes in terms of the calendar. They just change the days and move them around. But they can't move the calendar days because the days aren't going to change. They can just move the calendar around to make different days. Say this is now, where instead of it was Sunday, now it's Wednesday. But Sunday didn't move. The calendar moved the day that they called that. And they only changed the date. They never changed the physical day because there's no way to do that. That was set in stone by its creator. But most of these changes, as I said, were all about ego, profit, or something even more nefarious, the refusal to accept God as the final authority. Even the story of the birth of our Messiah has been corrupted. The only way to get the story straight is to hear it directly from the Word of God. So let's go to Luke, the first chapter, the first verse. And that's kind of where we're going to park today. So wherever else I say go, always keep a finger there so you don't get lost. And to make it as plain as possible, I'll be reading from the literal version. Luke, the first chapter, the first verse. Since many took in hand to draw up an account concerning the matters having been borne out among us, as those from the beginning delivered to us, becoming eyewitnesses and ministers of the word, it seemed good also to me, having traced out all things accurately from the first, to write in order to you, most excellent Theophilus. The fact that he gave this Theophilus this title leads me to believe that he was not only a convert, but possibly had some authority in the Roman government. Now, for those who don't know, the writer of the book of Luke is obviously the doctor and physician, Luke. Verse 4. Of course, now, back then a doctor was a little bit different than doctors now. What he basically did was use the herbs and the herbs of the field to heal people, and other things in their primitive manner, such as chiropractor and things of that nature. It was all natural. There was no pharma back then. Verse 4, that you may know the certainty concerning the words which you were taught. In the days of Herod, the king of Judea, there was a certain priest named Zacharias of the daily course of Abijah. And his wife was of the daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth. and they were both righteous before God, walking blameless in all the commandments and ordinances of Yahweh. Now keep your finger here, because we'll be coming back here momentarily. Now this is why most seekers of this information can never find it. They run across that course of Abijah and don't realize how important that is to what you look for. They don't know what this course of Abijah is. The courses or divisions of priests were those priests who were chosen for temple service by King David and all succeeding people who were dealing with the Hebrew religion. But King David was first, and he came up with these things. But these were the priests that were chosen for temple service by King David, and they were the priests assigned to kill sacrifices, burn incense, and do all of the other duties that were expected to be done in the temple during the holy days. Now, for those who thought that it wasn't there, that information that even tells you that is right there. Let's go to 1 Chronicles, the 24th chapter, the first verse. Keep your finger there in Luke. 1 Chronicles, the 24th chapter, the 18th verse. And rather than go through all this, when you get a chance, read it on your own time, but it shows you in detail all of the courses. All of the courses, all 20 of them. But the one we're interested in for our purposes, well, we'll go up to the 8th, because that's the one we're interested in. And these are the divisions of the sons of Aaron. The sons of Aaron were Nadab, Abihu, Eleazar, and Issachar. But Nadab and Abihu died before their father, and they had no sons. And Eleazar and Ithamar were priests. They were until they, if you recall, offered strange fire, and God took them out. Verse 3, and David divided them according to their offices in their service, even Zadok of the sons of Eleazar and Ahimelech of the sons of Ithamar. And more sons of Eleazar were found than the sons of Ithamar for heads of the men, and they divided them. For the sons of Eleazar were 16 chiefs to their father's house, and 8 to the sons of Ithamar, to the house of their fathers. So they divided them by lots. In other words, they chose among them to see which ones would take these offices. Verse 6, and Shemaiah, the son of Nathaniel, the scribe of the Levites, wrote them before the king and the rulers and Zadok the priest. But the bottom line is this. Go to verse 10. The 7th to Hakaz, the 8th course to Abijah. This was important. You see, we've established that Abijah had the 8th course, or the 8th shift, if you will, for those who work night shift or something. Abijah had the 8th course or shift in the temple service. Now, we now need to know how long the courses lasted. But we do know that all the courses were named for all future generations after the first man assigned to these posts by King David. Now, let's see how long. Go to 1 Chronicles, the 23rd chapter, the first verse. 1 Chronicles, the 23rd chapter, the first verse. David became an old man, so he made his son Solomon the new king of Israel. David gathered all the leaders of Israel and all the priests and Levites. David counted the Levites, who were 30 years old and older. Altogether, there were 38,000 Levites. David said 24,000 will supervise the work of building Yahweh's temple. 6,000 will be court officers and judges. 4,000 will be gatekeepers, and 4,000 will be musicians. Yes. I made special musical instruments for them. They will use them to praise Yahweh. David separated the Levites into three groups. They were the tribes of Levi's three sons, Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. Now let's skip down to verse 28. There's something very important here that we need to know. 1 Chronicles 23, go back down to verse 28. Where it says, because their station was to wait on the sons of Aaron for the service of the house of Yahweh in the courts and over the chambers and in the purifying of all things and the work of the service of the house of God and for the showbread and for the fine flour for meal offering and for the unleavened cakes and for that which is baked in the pan and for that which is fried and for all manner of measure and size, and to stand every morning to thank and praise Yahweh, and likewise at evening, and to offer up all burnt sacrifices unto Yahweh on the Sabbaths, in the new moons, and on the set feasts by number, according to the order commanded unto them continually before Yahweh. And that they should keep the charge of the tent of the congregation, and the charge of the holy place, and the charge of the sons of Aaron, their brethren, in the service of the house of Yahweh. This is what they did. Whenever there were services or anything to go on in the temple, these men all had assigned duties within the temple, and they did them within their courses so that everyone wasn't there all the time. But there was one time when they were all there. All of them were expected to be there for the high holy days, all courses. Thus, Zechariah's course was named after its first keeper under King David, Abijah. We can figure out from this that Zechariah's turn of service would end in roughly the 10th week. Why the 10th week? Because there were 2 weeks from the first where they were all there together, because they were holy days. There was Passover that came in the days of unleavened bread. So during those times, all courses served together because there was only the one temple. So all people from all over the world came to Jerusalem for whatever feast it was. So there had to be enough men to deal with all of the sacrifices and all of the burning of incense and all of those things that happened during those days. They didn't need so many during the normal Sabbaths and the other days. But we can figure out from this that Zechariah's turn of service would end in roughly the 10th week of the sacred year, which in 4 BC would have ended in our late May to early June. The holy year, as we have seen, began in the spring. Study shows that it was 4 BC because according to Roman secular history and the writings of Flavius Josephus, Herod died in the middle part of the year 4 BC. Getting a little bit at the head of the story, an angel told Mary and Joseph to go to Egypt in a dream to escape Herod, who was killing all children 2 and under, wanting to kill the coming king, Yeshua. But we get out of order here, but just to understand it, let's go to Matthew, the 2nd chapter, the 19th verse, so you understand why they moved as they did. Matthew, the 2nd chapter, the 19th verse. But Herod having expired, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt, saying, Arise, and take the child and his mother, and go into the land of Israel, for the ones who sought the child's life are dead. And he arose and took the child and his mother, and came into the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus reigned in Judea in his father Herod's place, he was afraid to go there. And being warned by God in a dream, he turned aside into the parts of Galilee, and he came and lived in a city called Nazareth, so that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophets. He shall be called a Nazarene. But let's go back to Luke, the first chapter, the 7th verse, and follow Zechariah and Elizabeth, the parents of the coming John the Baptist. Verse 7. And no child was born to them because Elizabeth was barren, and both were advanced in their days. And it happened in his serving as priest in the order of his course before Yahweh, according to the custom of the priests, entered into the holy place of Yahweh. It was Zechariah's lot to burn incense. And all the multitude of the people were praying outside at the house of incense, and an angel of Yahweh appeared to him standing on the right of the altar of incense, right there while he was working. And seeing this, Zechariah was troubled, and fear fell on him. But the angel said to him, "Do not fear, Zacharias, because your prayer was heard, and your wife Elizabeth will bear a son to you, and you shall call his name John, and he will be joy and exultation to you, and many will rejoice over his birth. For he shall be great in the eyes of Yahweh, and he shall not drink wine or strong drink, and he will be filled of the Holy Spirit, even from his mother's womb. And he will turn many of the sons of Israel to Yahweh their God, and he will go out before him in the spirit and power of Elijah, to turn the hearts of fathers to their children, and disobedient ones to the wisdom of the just, and to make ready a people having been prepared for Yahweh." Want some reading? You'll find that prophecy in Malachi, the 4th chapter, the 5th and 6th verses. Verse 18, and Zechariah said to the angel, "But by what shall I know this? For I am old, and my wife is advanced in her days." And answering, the angel said to him, "I am Gabriel." How can you doubt me? I am Gabriel, who stands before God, and I was sent to speak to you and to announce to you the good news of these things. And behold, you shall be silent and not be able to speak until the day these things take place, because you did not believe my words, which shall be fulfilled in your season. God punishes you for doubt when it's obvious that this should be what it is. Verse 21, and the people were expecting Zacharias, and they wondered at his delay in the temple. But coming out, he was not able to speak to them, and they recognized that he had seen a vision in the temple. And he was making signs to them and continued dumb. And it happened when the days of his service were fulfilled, he went away to his home. And you got to figure that Elizabeth wondered what happened. And he was somehow able to, through sign language perhaps, explain to her what happened, but think that he's not able to speak all this time. Now, having been gone for 10 days and another week, in which all priests served for the high holy days, for the Passover and days of unleavened bread, Zechariah finally went home. Verse 24, and after these days his wife Elizabeth conceived, and she did hide herself 5 months, saying, "So has Yahweh done to me in the days in which he looked on me to take away my reproach from among men." Now, saints, let's do some counting. If Zechariah got home in early June and she conceived in mid-June, Elizabeth having hid herself for 5 months, that would put us in the middle or to the end of November or Kislev. Just to know where you're at. Now, let's read on. Verse 26, and in the 6th month after Elizabeth's conception, the angel Gabriel was sent by God to a city of Galilee named Nazareth, to a virgin who had been betrothed to a man whose name was Joseph, of the house of David, and the virgin's name was Mary. And entering, the angel said to her, "Hail, one having received grace, Yahweh is with you. You are blessed among women. And seeing this, she was disturbed at his word and considered what kind of greeting this might be. And the angel said to her, do not fear, Mary, for you have found favor from God. And behold, you will conceive in your womb and bear a son, and you will call his name Yeshua. This one will be great and will be called Son of the Most High. And Yahweh will give him the throne of his father David. And he will reign over the house of Jacob to the ages. In other words, on and on. His kingdom will never end. And of his kingdom there will be, as it says, no end. But Mary said to the angel, how will this be, since I do not know a man? And answering, the angel said to her, the Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. And for this reason, the Holy One being born of you will be called Son of God. And behold, your kinswoman Elizabeth, she also conceived a son in her old age, and she is in the 6th month to her who was called barren. For nothing shall be impossible with God. And Mary said, behold, the slave woman of Yahweh, may it be to me according to your word. And the angel departed from her. And rising up in these days, Mary went into the hill country with haste to a city of Judah, and she entered into the house of Zechariah and greeted Elizabeth. Now obviously, Mary went to visit Elizabeth as it was now December or Adar, and the weather, as here, had begun to get rough. Elizabeth would have had difficulty visiting her being 6 months pregnant, but again, this would have been near the end of December, possibly December 25th. But let's see what happened here when she got to their home. 40. And it happened as Elizabeth heard Mary's greeting, the babe in her womb leaped, and Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit. And she cried out with a loud voice and said, you are being blessed among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb. When she came in, the 2 babies jumped in the wombs. No one knew it but the 2 women, but they knew what was going on. Verse 43. And why is this to me that the mother of my Lord comes to me? For behold, as the sound of your greeting came to my ears, the babe in my womb leaped in exaltation. And blessed is she believing, because there will be a completion to the things spoken to her from Yahweh. And Mary said, my soul magnifies Yahweh, and my spirit exults in God, my Savior. For he looked upon the humiliation of his slave woman. For behold, from now on all generations will count me blessed. 49. For the mighty one did great things to me, and holy is his name. And his mercy is to generations of generations to those who fear him. He performed mightily with his arm. He scattered proud ones in the thoughts of their heart. He put down powerful ones from thrones and exalted lowly ones. He filled the hungry with good things, and he sent the rich away empty. He helped his servant Israel in order to remember mercy, even as he spoke to our fathers, to Abraham, and to his seed to the age. And Mary remained with her for about 3 months and returned to her home. And the time was fulfilled to Elizabeth for her to bear, and she bore a son. Now it is known that John the Baptist was born to Elizabeth and Zechariah on the evening of Passover of 4 BC. Verse 58. And the neighbors and their relatives heard that Yahweh magnified his mercy with her, and they rejoiced with her. And it happened on the 8th day that they came to circumcise the child, and were calling it by his father's name, Zechariah. And his mother answered, saying, no, not so. He shall be called John. And they said to her, no one is among your kindred who is called by this name. And they signaled to his father what he might be desired to be called. Now remember, Zechariah has been mute since his temple service, almost 6 months prior. And the announcement made here to Gabriel, to him, he'd said nothing. He'd had nothing to say up to this point. Verse 63, and asking for a writing tablet, he wrote, saying, John was one of those things that was just unbelievable. Verse 63, and asking for a tablet, he wrote, saying, John is his name. And all marveled, and instantly his mouth was opened, and his tongue loosed, and he spoke, blessing God. And fear came on all those living around them and in all the hill country of Judea. All these things were talked about. Oh, I'd imagine they were. And all who heard laid them up in their hearts, saying, what then will this child be? And the hand of Yahweh was with him. And his father Zechariah was filled of the Holy Spirit and prophesied, saying, blessed be Yahweh, the God of Israel, because he visited and worked redemption for his people. And he raised up a horn of salvation for us in the house of his servant David, even as he spoke through the mouth of his holy prophets from the age before, salvation from ones hostile to us and from the hand of all those ones hostile to us, to execute mercy with our fathers and to remember his holy covenant, the oath which he swore to our father Abraham to give us, that we, being delivered out of the hand of those hostile to us, in order to serve him without fear, in consecration and righteousness before him in all the days of our lives. And you, child, will be called prophet of the Most High, for you will go before the face of Yahweh to prepare his ways, to give a knowledge of salvation to his people by remission of their sins. Through the tender salvation to his people by remission of his sins, through the tender heart of mercy of our God, in which the dayspring from on high will visit us, to appear to those sitting in darkness and in shadow of death, to direct our feet into the way of peace. And the child grew and became strong in spirit, and he was in deserted places until the day of his showing to Israel. And the rest is history, and we can find it in the Bible. However, now, this being December 25th or somewhere thereabouts, we don't really know. They were guessing, so we'll guess too, that this is probably what happened on December 25th, not the birth, but the conception. Now, if Mary conceived in the last week of December, if we count forward, the normal human gestation period is about 9 months or 266 days, 38 weeks. We come up with a birth for Yeshua that is somewhere between the last week of September and the first week of October, which, depending on what year it was either just before, leading up to, and into the days of the Feast of Tabernacles. Everything God does goes along with everything that he did before, so that it all fits together, so that his people, if no one else, understand exactly what's going on. What's amazing is the information is right here in the Bible, yet those who studied for years can't seem to find the course of Abijah. Yet they can find Macy's, they can find TJ Maxx, They can find Sears. They can find they can find other places. Fascinating to me, but it is what it is. And it's also fascinating that so many, even when it's known, will they change? We don't know. We can only pray that some will get to it and figure these things out at some point before the tribulation becomes full. Because it's very important to understand that this whole mask, this whole masquerade, this whole charade, this whole world that envelops us is based on untruth. Has nothing to do with this book. Matter of fact, eschews the book at every chance. All you hear are people, are we sure that we can believe this book? If I didn't, I wouldn't be standing here. But I will say this. Now that we've heard the truth, all we can ask is that we hold to it, believe in it, and accept it for what it is, and leave all the other stuff alone. I'm not saying leave the people alone, because they're going to do what they want to do. They're going to do what they will do, and hopefully when the time comes, they will do what they need to do to get to this point. Let us not lose where we are trying to bash them for where they may not need to be yet. God bless you all.